everybody, it's your friendly neighborhood Jerry Rasco, and I'm back with you for another episode of our amazing Spider-Man art retrospective videos. So, as always, I want to start off by saying thank you to everybody who has been following and watching the videos. I really appreciate it. If this is your first time checking out this video on my YouTube channel, think about subscribing. This is a series of videos that I do that come out every Monday morning at 8 a.m. where we talk about early issues of The Amazing Spider-Man, going through the art that made the comics so incredible. Very excited today. This is a issue, again, that if you've been following along, you're going to know it is a little bit different than what we've seen before. So if you haven't seen my episodes on issues 17 and 18, you probably want to check those out because this is the culmination of a 3-issue story arc, which is, again, something we had not seen before in Amazing Spider-Man. We had seen a lot of what I refer to as one and dones, where an issue where a new villain was created or a new character was introduced, and then Spidey resolves the issue or resolves the problem by the end of the issue. This, though, we had a cliffhanger, at the end of issue 17, and then more sort of results or trying to think for the right word here, more repercussions from what happened in issue 17 and issue 18, and now issue 19 is that resolution. So definitely different than we had seen before, and something that I think you'll find is much more in line with what you think of as modern comics today, where the monthly storyline seems to go from issue to issue with a little cliffhanger or a little thread of the story that you can continue from point to point. So I'm interested to see how this works out in an early issue like this and share it with all of you. So without further ado, let's get into it. Here we have the cover for Amazing Spider-Man number 19. And if you have not, if this is your first video and you're not a follower of the channel or the this series, I will explain. This is a scanned copy of this comic book. So somebody had this original copy of number 19 and put it onto a flatbed scanner and scanned the pages directly. This is not a reproduction or anything like that. And that's why you see that it is in pretty rough condition. The top has been kind of chewed up. But this is what was available, right? So now we may be able to go online and find more digital versions of stuff like this. But I really like the original copies in this way. Not only do we see the original coloring, but we also see the original ads and kind of get a real feel for what this would have been like to have in your hands in those 1960s when this first came out. So that explains the condition. This is not a comic book that I own, but again, a scanned copy that Marvel had put out in 2004. So the cover's interesting. I think it's a great cover. The note that I had here says Triumph. I don't know. I don't have access to every Marvel comic from the time, but this idea of the character breaking through the page. So in this case, Spidey's breaking through this webbing, coming at the reader. Obviously, if you're a comic book fan, as I am, probably the most famous version of this you're going to think of would be Giant Size X-Men #1, where the X-Men, the new X-Men featuring, Colossus and Wolverine, Storm, etc., they're all breaking through the page and coming at the reader, ripping through. This is something that we've seen over and over as a great comic book trope of a character with a really dynamic cover. I just don't know that we've seen it before, so it's possible this may be the first example of this. But again, I don't have access to not only all of Marvel's history, but of course other publishers' history as well. So it may have been something that was seen before, but if not, we're looking at a piece of history, which is pretty cool. We see the other characters that are going to be involved in the comic. And one of the things that I've always heard artists talk about is the white cover. So if you have an option where, in this case, you're not doing a specific background, so we're not drawing the city, we're not drawing machines, we're not drawing a spaceship, we're not drawing any of that kind of stuff. It's just Spidey, and the background is essentially neutral. A white cover sells better. And that is because all of the imagery and the colors pop so much more off of the white cover. So I have heard plenty of artists talk about whenever you have the opportunity to make a white cover, you do so. For whatever reasons, the psychology of it, with fans, with buyers, they see that and go, that seems to be special, captures your attention, and for whatever reason sells better. I also noted in my notes. I wrote in my notes that it's interesting. Again, Spidey is a character that you can cover up most of his features. First, of course, he has no face, right? The face is covered, but even the Spidey mask, he's covering with his fist. There's webbing in the middle. His hands are coming out to us, so you can't see the chest. You can't see the Spidey logo. But this costume is so iconic and so unique that you don't have to see the whole figure to know exactly who that is. And that's one of the real strengths of Spider-Man that allowed, I think Steve Ditko will see this throughout this issue, to put Spider-Man in more unique and entertaining poses and camera angles, because you didn't have to worry about showing his face, showing the symbol, etc. I mean, I'll give you an example. Another example is you could take, say, like a Batman. Now, Batman has an incredibly recognizable with like a silhouette. But if you show Batman from the back, it's just a big cape with that flows into a head with pointy ears, and depending on how you draw it and light it, it could be really it could get lost. Now, again, Batman is so ubiquitous to culture that we all know it, but if you're not drawing that cape spread out with all of the scallops in it so it looks like a big giant Batwing kind of, Batman from behind in the right lighting or the right scenario might not be very recognizable. It's just sort of a shape. Spidey is super recognizable. And so artists, if you're looking to create characters that last the test of time, a unique and recognizable costume in any pose, any direction is definitely a key. So we're going to jump right in, and we've got our splash page here, and this is a great splash page. We're back to this idea of doing essentially a montage art piece in the first page, rather than getting into a splash page that features the first page of the story, right? So this almost could be its own cover. And recently, again, if you follow the channel, I did a live stream with Nick Caputo, who is an amazing Marvel comic books and especially Spider-Man fan aficionado and historian. And he and I kind of talked about this, where to me it seems strange that we're losing a key page. You only have a certain number of pages to get your story done in. And Steve Ditko is using one whole page just to recap the cover, recap what's going to go on in the story. Spidey's going to fight a bunch of villains with the Human Torch helping. We see that right here. We know guest stars, Human Torch, Sandman, the Enforcers. So why do it again? Well, one of the things that it dawned on me is the business of comics. So in the old days, comic books were not sold in comic book stores the way they are today. That is referred to as the direct market. In the old days, comic books were sold to book dealers. So it might be a newsstand, it might be a grocery store. I got my comics at a local pharmacy on a spinner rack. There were a lot of different places you would sell these comics. So they would send, the store would buy the comics and then turn around and resell them for profit. But what if they didn't sell the comic that month? They again, this wasn't a direct market comic book store, so they didn't have the opportunity to sell back issues and things like that. So what they would do is they would take and cut off the cover, and then they would send the cover back to the publisher, and get a credit for the ones that didn't sell on their order for the next month. But what do you do with a comic book without a cover? Well, if you have a splash page like this, you basically have a second cover, and maybe you could resell it. So instead of selling it for 12 cents, maybe you sell it without the cover for 5 cents. And again, in today's world, we look at it and go, oh, you cut the cover off this comic, you wouldn't put it in a plastic sleeve and put it in a board and protect it. And nobody did that back then. These were not meant to be collected and saved for eternity. These were disposable. That was the whole idea. It's why they were made on the cheapest newsprint pulp paper, made as fast as possible. The whole idea is that this is meant to be bought, traded, rolled up, put it in your back pocket, given to your friend, given to your brother, sister, whoever. Kids, draw on it, put your piece of paper over the top and trace it. So you're digging grooves in with the pencil. This was not meant to be a massive collector's item. And so cutting off the cover wouldn't have been a big deal, but how would you know which issue you had? Well, if you have a nice splash page that reproduces that cover, you would. So that might have been part of it. Again, just speculation on my part, but something to note. And again, if you're not familiar with the history of the comic book business, a lot of people probably wouldn't know that that's how things used to be done. So we've got a great thing here, and the motion on all these figures is terrific. There is no single figure that is just in a static pose. Even the Human Torch, who's bound up in this rope and kind of being grabbed by the Sandman, is sort of twisting in the trail of fire, makes you feel like he's sort of somersaulting through the air. Of course, Spidey is always in motion, but all these characters have weight, movement, action. This is a great splash page. If it wasn't for the fact that this concept of busting through the page towards the reader is so iconic, I would almost say this is a better cover. It's certainly a more dynamic overall composition. Oh, and then one more thing, the composition. We'll talk about that. Composition, if you're not familiar, is just the term that talks about how your elements are placed within the framework of the art that you're making. So that can apply to the composition of a painting, a photograph, a sculpture, anything like that. Now, this is using what's called a triangle composition. So you would take your figures, and if you drew a line over the top, sort of this peak up here of probably the Human Torch would come down, and you notice you can kind of go like a straight line through the arm to this guy's called Ox, down to his foot, which overlaps to Spidey, which comes around and links up with the arm, which comes over here to this arm, which links up to this figure, which comes here, which goes to the rope and back to the top. And now we have a nice triangle. That is a classic composition idea, the triangle or the pyramid. I will say triangle because it's not a 3D figure. That you can find that goes all the way back to things like Renaissance paintings and beyond. It is just one of those things that is ubiquitous throughout art, and a great way to set up your composition to move the character or move your viewer's eyes around through the whole piece. So the triangle composition is something you would learn about through art history, and then we see it again. Is something that could be done through famous Renaissance paintings and all the way here to Amazing Spider-Man. Spidey, so again, we'll recap very quickly the story. So Spidey was fighting Green Goblin. He finds out that Aunt May has had a heart attack. He flees. The world thinks Spidey is a coward. He spends the last issue at home taking care of Aunt May and not fighting crime. And so crime is beginning to run rampant through the city. And J. Jonah Jameson couldn't be happier because he has finally proven that he was right and that Spider-Man is a bum and a coward the whole time. So he has been wearing this super creepy smile through about an issue and a half, let's say, to here. But Aunt May feels better. She's given him the pep talk. And now he is back in action. And this is some really good movement throughout the page. Of course, this springing away from his hands. But this one here is a great montage action piece of him jumping and rolling from punch to punch, where he's taking out a huge crowd of people. Again, just keeping the pace and that action going, which is terrific. I will also say this one here. So these guys are robbing a bank. This is a nice framing motif for me. Well, The problem here is that the panel is very small. I've talked about this a lot. These old comics have a lot of panels in them. And when you put more panels, each panel is a little smaller. So everything has to be drawn small. And then you have to fit in your dialogue and your narration, which has to be at a certain typeface. Otherwise, it's too small for readers to read. I would love to see Spidey bigger in the frame. And then you're seeing through between his legs, his arms, etc., the criminals on the ground, to use him as a bigger framing device. But I get that's the idea here, is that you're looking past through Spidey as he's leaping down onto these criminals. That's a really nice framing technique there. And then I thought this is really cool too. One of the things that Steve Ditko has done so well that even not all Spidey artists end up doing down the road is he really allows Spidey to use his powers in a creative way. So there's this lineup of guys running away to try to escape, and he runs along the wall horizontally, punching each of them as he goes. Now, he could have bounced along, he could have webbed them up, you know, he could have just been on the ground, but running along the wall completely horizontal is a fantastic idea. What a really cool way of showing that Spider-Man is not just a superhero in the line of, say, like a Batman or Daredevil, or, you know, later, of course, we have characters like the Punisher and stuff like that. This guy can do things that nobody else can do. So that's really neat. And then this is a great body pose here. And like I said up at the beginning, you can have an image from behind of Spider-Man. You never see his face. You don't have to. You can't read his emotions through the mask. So you can handle stuff with some narration, but you can just put him into really cool bendy poses as he's running up this wall using, you know, his hands and feet. So very, very cool. And then I noted here, so we have J. Jonah Jameson has been wearing this very evil, creepy grin. You haven't seen his eyes since the end of issue number 17. He's just been squinted up. He's got these fat cheeks and the wrinkles and stuff. And now he learns that he was wrong, that Spidey is back. And just to watch his face melt over these 3 panels is fantastic. You literally see this change, the shape. You watch his skin just sort of droop back down to what we know J. Jonah Jameson to be, is more of a wrinkly, like, you know, now he's got the wrinkles are back in his forehead, the lines around his mouth, everything just droops. And that is a really great transition. That is terrific art right there. Let's see here. I mentioned this one. So just real quick, this is what I would call a camera turn, and a great use of the camera turn. So I've talked about this in some other issues as well. The way that you tell stories visually in a comic book have a lot of similarities to the way you would do things in film or television. And there is a 180 rule. And what it means is, if I, the viewer, am looking at something from this direction, the best way to explain it is football. And I'll preface this in case anybody who's watching is not from the United States. American football. So when American football is on TV, the teams go from one direction on the screen to the other direction, and then the other team goes in the other direction. And the camera is always sort of in that position, because if all of a sudden you flip the camera to the other side, now even though the person is running in the same direction, your viewpoint has changed, and now it looks like they're running in the wrong direction. And it can be confusing for viewers who don't understand, or, you know, are just kind of watching, maybe not listening or whatever, that the camera has changed sides and this person is not running the wrong way. So you want to keep your camera on that sort of what they call a 180 line. But you can move it along that whole line. So you can flip it as far as you want without crossing to the other side. And again, the way that I learned it when I was in college was they use the example of the football. Here, what we've done is we've got the enforcers are going after the Human Torch. They grab him and pull him down with this lasso. So we are slightly to the side, almost behind the Human Torch, and we can see the enforcers here. And this is a great camera turn. We flipped on that 180 line. So we're still on the line. Now we're slightly behind the enforcers, or to the side of the enforcers, and Johnny is throwing fireballs at them. It's more effective because you want the fireballs to be coming kind of towards the reader, towards this direction. Whereas if we kept this angle and he was throwing the fireballs at them from behind, they would be getting smaller as they go away from us, and it wouldn't be as effective. So this is a great use of the camera turn. And of course, Steve Ditko has done a fantastic job of keeping everything in line. And what I mean by that is this guy, again, this is Ox, this is Montana. So Ox is on Montana's right. So when we flip the camera, Ox is still on Montana's right. They're in the same positions. We have simply changed where we're standing, if you will. And then as well, the rope is coming around. The rope is, as you can see, because Johnny's overlapping it here, the rope is wrapping around his right side and then wrapping around his waist. The rope here is the same way. It is wrapping around his right side and then around the figure from there. So the rope has maintained consistency. The placement of the figures has maintained consistency, and that makes it so we can flip that camera angle without confusing the reader or the viewer. So that's an excellent job of that that camera turn. Let's see. So we'll keep going. They grab him. They capture Johnny. They don't, they're not too worried about Spider-Man. Sandman thinks he can handle him, like he did in the previous issue, even though Spidey was just running away. So we move on. Again, artistically, not a lot to really talk about. Some nice, that's a nice sleeping face of Aunt May. Surprisingly hard sometimes to draw people in simple things like this, of like closed eyes, relaxed, sleeping. We don't think about it. It's not something you draw a lot probably in a comic book or in an illustration. So that's a nice piece, but overall, nothing too crazy. Again, a lot of panels. We're now into a 9-panel grid. And I think it's just because there's a lot of stuff to get through in this issue. And this is not an oversized issue. This is just a regular issue with the same page count as we would always have. So in order to hit all the points we need, I think, Steve had to break it down into just a lot more visuals than he normally might have. I think for the most part, he tends to be more of the 6-panel, using 6 panels on a page. 9 is quite a bit. So Spidey follows the other enforcer, Fancy Dan, who is kind of the martial arts judo guy, and he follows him into this building, and it's a big trap, right? They're going to overwhelm him with just sheer numbers. And this is pretty interesting here. I do mention, like, we're going to see a lot. We're going to see a lot of fighting. We're going to see a lot of really cool motions and stuff. This is a really neat idea of Ox, who's the big strong guy, literally throwing his partner at Spidey to knock him off the ceiling. I thought that was, again, really cool. He could have thrown a brick. He could have thrown a tire or just, whatever. But to throw another human being was pretty cool. And then I like this as well. Spidey lands. Now, he could have landed on his feet, because in the next panel, he's leaping up out of the way of everybody. But he lands on his hands and then just pushes up off his hands to leap away. And again, another great example of where Steve Ditko was showing Spidey's power set in a way that maybe other people didn't, or showing that he could do things that other superheroes couldn't. Maybe Daredevil would have landed on his feet and then bounded back up out of the way, but Spidey can leap almost as high off his hands as he can off his feet. It's incredible. So really, really nice way of doing that. And then this panel here is another one I think that may emphasize, we've talked about this before, what I refer to as the Marvel method. So I've talked about this before in our comics, and great piece. We talked about it a lot in my conversation with Nick. So in the early days like this, Steve Ditko and Stan Lee, who wrote the issue, would have a conversation. Might be a phone conversation, might be a quick meeting at the office. just to go over what's called the plot. And the plot is just a very simple outline of what happens in the story. No details, no specifics, just what are the hot points or the high points from, so we have a beginning and a middle, and then here's how it ends. And then Steve Ditko would go home and break that plot into pages and go, okay, so the beginning should be this many pages and we'll show this. And then here's the action piece kind of in the middle. And then here's how I'm going to conclude it over the next couple pages. And then, and then he would go ahead and draw it, right? And so he would then create essentially the individual actions. Like Stan Lee didn't say, I want Ox throwing Fancy Dan at Spider-Man. That was a convenience that Steve Ditko came up with as part of the way he was going to tell this story. And then Stan writes it, right? And he goes, oh, that's cool. And then he fills in the dialogue to make sense of the action and to bring characterization to it. So that's the partnership, right? But sometimes what happens is, so the artist may draw something. We've seen this with Stan and Jack. We've seen it here with Steve and Stan, and anybody that works this Marvel method. It can happen. I've heard it happened with John Byrne and Chris Claremont on the X-Men and stuff like that. The artist draws something. So Spidey gets nabbed by the lasso. We can see the lasso is around his arms, kind of pinning his arms. Ox swings. There is a inclination here in the motion that he has struck something. That's the symbol, or the whatever you want to call it, the legend, if you will, that says that he hit something. If he swung and missed, we'd have a clean arc. But this shows there was contact here. That is the storytelling method we use to show contact in a comic book, right? And Spidey is flipping back. Now, what he says is, one punch ought to do ya. Hey, how'd he roll away so easy? I ate my Wheaties this morning. What else? Well, that doesn't make sense. I mean, I guess maybe you're saying that Spidey's so strong he can just shrug off this hit. But I get the feeling maybe what Steve was drawing is, every once in a while, Spidey's not perfect. He's gonna take a hit. But how does he bounce back? How does he roll with it? How does he, overcome? And I think it probably, what you really seen with the dialogue here is something maybe like, he's like, I'll hold him. And he goes, hey, there you go. I'm going to lay one on him. Or, hey, finally a good clean shot. And then Spidey would roll away and maybe he just goes, ooh, or in his head, maybe a thought balloon that says, ooh, I can't take too many more of those, or something like that would have made more sense. This really downplays Ox, who's supposed to be, he's so strong, he's thrown another human being at somebody, and yet this does nothing. So for me, that's a loss or a mistake in terms of the Marvel method, and how sometimes that can kind of fail, in my opinion, the storytelling. So I think that's a miss there. We're continuing with more action, more great movement. I love it. Same here. Like, again, Ox punches him, he flies back, but he's like, yeah, he rattled me a little, but he's, again, Spidey's still moving through and using the blow and using the momentum to his benefit. That is great storytelling. And again, we're moving from panel to panel in a way that just moves. He's up in the air. He gets grabbed. He's punched and flipped over. He gets the lasso off him and kind of hops this dude. And then guy jumps on his back. He flips him off the back. He gets punched. His momentum takes him into the next guy. He punches him. And then everybody starts to run. The cops show up. So great movement, great poses. I love the way, I say this a lot, we've talked about this in previous issues where Spidey has fought a lot of villains at the same time. I love the way he moves through the panels, panel to panel, and you can really track that movement. Again, something that Steve Ditko excelled at. Other artists that we'll see down the road may take more of the snapshot approach, where it's an image, an image, an image, and the readers, our imagination fills in the gaps between those images. Steve really tends to do more of a drawing moment to moment that really tracks, as opposed to a snapshot here, a snapshot there. Now we move back and just, again, art's okay. This is what we call talking heads. Nothing super great. It's nice. One of the things, if you're doing a talking head piece of the story, make sure that you're doing little things like this, like tilting a character's head, having their hands move. People talk with their hands. I talk with my hands a lot. Doing a little bit of business. If they've got a pen or paper or an object, something they can hold, that's a great way to bring some interest to just people faces talking. But what we have here is the introduction of a character named Ned Leeds. So Betty, this is Betty Brant. Betty and Peter had been an item. He considered her his girlfriend for a while. Things kind of fell off. The two of them have had some issues, mostly, to be honest, because of Betty's insecurities and jealousy, which is unfounded, but that's it. That's kind of her character. And then, so she starts seeing this guy named Ned Leeds. And Ned Leeds is a reporter for the Daily Bugle. And part of her idea, I think we see this later, is that she did it in a way to probably make Peter jealous. But Ned Leeds sticks around. He becomes a supporting character and actually becomes a very important character later in some of the stories. We'll see that years down the road. But interesting just to note here the first appearance of Ned Leeds. Not the first appearance, but the introduction. I think we saw him, and Peter didn't know who he was. But this is where he's introduced as with the name Ned Leeds. J. Jonah Jameson back to his usual grumpy self, and that's just easily depicted here with just his scowls. He's chomping on his cigar, the way his tie is flying around. We're back to good old JJJ. Again, not a ton here that I took note of specifically, other than this panel here. Again, we're back to the 9-panel grids because so much is happening in such a short space. We've got to get through it, but Johnny Storm from the Human Torch is trapped in this glass container with not enough air. So enough air to breathe, but if he uses his powers, that burns up the oxygen too fast and he'd pass out. So, but what I liked about this one is the way that Steve drew this. The panel, or the container that he's in, is slightly off the panel. We know that we're using a small panel, so that works to his advantage. And by putting Johnny in this pose, he feels very confined. It feels very claustrophobic. It feels very small. And that's a great job. He could have pulled back and shown a very small figure in the container, but by doing it with this way, pushing against that edge, it just feels, basically he's made even though the panel is to say is this big, he's made the panel this big by putting this line of the container. This red part behind almost doesn't play as part of the panel. It almost reads like it's a fraction of the size. And again, just adds to the captured claustrophobic feel. So that's a really nice element of storytelling. Again, more very cool poses here. I mentioned specifically panels 2, 3, panel 5, and panel 6. I really liked those a lot. This one's great. What a great twist, right? So the hips are twisted one way, the shoulders are twisted another, and the head twisted back even further. Again, a pose that not any other character can do. Spidey is unique, and again, he's crawling. He can crawl sideways on a building, he can crawl up a building, he can crawl down a building. Very neat way of putting a unique character in a unique position. Really nice wall crawling poses. Steve Ditko was a master of that. Again, probably, you'll be the judge as we get to other future comics with Spidey. Was Steve the master of the web crawling pose, or is everybody kind of just using his example as we move forward? I think that might be the case. This is a great classic pose where Spidey's kind of sitting on the wall, with his feet horizontal on the wall and maybe a hand back. I've drawn that not that exact pose, but I've drawn that pose of Spidey sitting, against the wall, looking down at people. Great pose. On this next one here, here's the cover. So this would have definitely been drawn first, and then interesting that this kind of either captured, Steve's imagination, or Stan's, maybe, could have been the two of them going, yeah, that's a great idea. Let's have him swinging through, but it's the same pose. So we see that mirrored on the cover. And then I just wanted to note this: Spidey's upside down talking to this criminal. He's trying to, get some information, right? And funny for me as a kid trying to learn how to draw comics, it never dawned on me for a minute that you wouldn't just have your paper, and your paper is on your clipboard or your drawing board or taped to your drawing desk or whatever, and that you would draw this guy looking at Spidey, and then you would draw Spidey upside down. And I remember trying to draw Spidey upside down and being like, I can't, it's not working right. Why does it look weird? The angles aren't right. I'm not getting it. Why is it so hard? And it never dawned on me for a minute as a kid, just flip your paper around. Just flip your paper upside down, draw Spidey right side up, and then flip your paper back and draw this guy right side up. So again, if you're a young artist or a new artist, move your paper around. If Spidey is upside down, turn your paper upside down. If Spidey is sideways, completely sideways, turn your paper sideways. It's just so much easier than trying to do it in a weird angle and then not realizing how you're missing, elements or angles or whatever it is. And then great here, Spidey's spider sense goes off mid-swing. And this is a great, almost like pause in midair. Really neat. I don't know that we've seen that before in the comics, where usually he's got that hand on the rope, whether he's shooting his next web line or swinging from one area to the other. You almost never see him kind of in midair. Like here, he's let go of the web, but he's grabbing the wall, he's touching the wall. But to be in midair and just let go I thought was kind of cool. Neat idea. Spidey sneaks into the bad guys, and we've set up here. This page, the beginning of this page, is really a lot of setup. It's setting up that there's bad guys watching for him. It's set up that it's sort of this almost warehouse type scenario. Spidey sneaking through everybody. And so you've established where it is. There's wood, there's beams, there's this sort of weird wooden flooring. And I say that because we're about to get into a big section here of action with very, very little backgrounds, and it's perfectly okay. Today, one of the things you'll get, if you drew something like this, you would get fans or readers, might complain like, geez, guy never draws backgrounds. What, you don't know how to draw a background? You don't know how to draw doors or, perspective or whatever. And I argue it's not needed here because that's not the focus. We've established where this is. It's in this sort of warehouse area near the dock. We've established the beams, the wood, the space, all that kind of stuff. The tank that Johnny's held in. Let's just get to the action. That's the important thing. Nobody is paying Steve Ditko to draw wooden beams or boxes in the background or, whatever would be in this warehouse, a forklift, whatever. People are paying for him to draw Spider-Man beating the heck out of people, beating up the bad guys. That's what you do. So you have just enough to establish, with the shadows here, you establish where the floor is. They're not floating in space. They have shadows, so there's a surface underneath them. A few times here, we have some wooden boards. We have a little bit of a hint of a background. Same here. We have a little bit of the floor. That's all we need. And then this is just great. I'm just going to, again, my thing here was I put just a note of like 3 pages. Bigger panels, crazy action, no backgrounds. So I love it. This is fantastic. And I'm just going to take a minute. We're going to go through these pages and just sort of luxuriate in the imagery. And then we'll talk about it. So here we go. Just awesome. Okay. So these are just phenomenal. So, a great big panel here to set up the fight, that there's all kinds of people. Everybody's been waiting here for him. And Spidey is just going to flip through and just do everything he can to beat everybody and save the Human Torch. And he's doing all of his classic moves. He's flipping, he's shooting his webs. The guys are tackling him, and he's rolling backwards into a punch to knock guys out. He's cartwheeling away. He's leaping over people. He's fast. He's strong. Finally, Ox there takes a poke at him, and he just catches his fist. And again, we've seen this guy lift up the back of a car. We've seen him throw, tires. We've seen him throw his partner, Fancy Dan. And Spidey, with 2 punches, is finally like, I'm not pulling my punches anymore. And he just lays this guy out, which is phenomenal. Again, then he's just moving through fast. He breaks the Torch out so Torch can help. So now we have even more chaos going on. They're helping each other. And things are, just all over the place. Spidey's taking guys out. And then things are starting to break down. So now, Sandman's going to escape. They've kind of wrapped things up. And now the two guys all of a sudden aren't working together so well. And that's, that makes sense. Spidey doesn't team up. He's not he doesn't work with other people the way the Human Torch does. And of course, Human Torch works with the rest of the Fantastic Four. So he's not always as used to how Spidey would do things. And so they end up sort of just getting in each other's way and getting caught in the webbing. I really like this. I made a note about this. So Johnny's going to use his super, super hot flame to cut through Spidey's webbing, because it is kind of, he says that for the most part, you can see Spidey's webbing isn't going to burn when the torch is sort of at his normal temperature, but he's going to go white hot. And so Steve does a great job of using the light source. So few lines, the closer you are to the surface that's closer to the white, and then darker toward the back. So very, very nice lighting there, to where it's, it's all shadow on the backside of Johnny, the top of Spidey's head, stuff like that. Very, very nice lighting with a very super strong light source. And then, let's see here, lighting. Yep. And then that's kind of about it. I mean, so Sandman ends up getting taken down by the cops, which is unusual, right? They managed to do it. J. Jonah Jameson is back to his normal self, being unhappy, but Peter brings him a bunch of pictures, and then we see crazy, happy Jonah in a way again, but things are more back to normal. This is where, again, I mentioned Betty was kind of hoping to make Peter jealous, but he's like, hey, that's great. Good luck to you. You guys have a good time. He's good. Peter's good. And then, of course, the trope of the ever flip-flopping public. So the people who were there cheering Jonah as a guy who was proving to the world that Spidey's a bum are now like, Jonah's he's the bum. Yeah, this was all a scam, a plot. They're just to sell papers. It's a publicity stunt. And then little interesting. So the Fantastic Four, they don't show the Fantastic Four. They show their building, the Baxter Building, where the Fantastic Four live, and then just some dialogue about what happened with Torch and Spidey. And then this last piece here is Peter's being followed by a private detective. Now, I guess, interesting, I don't know why his spider sense wouldn't go off. I guess the guy's not threatening him. But we've talked about, like, in theory, Peter, like, when he'll duck into an alley or somewhere where he's going to change, his spider sense would tell him if somebody's watching him. Like, so that's one of the ways that people don't find out who he is, right? That spider sense warns him. So I don't know why spider sense wouldn't warn him that this guy's watching him. But somebody has hired him, and this guy calls back to his boss, who is shadowed. Clearly I would argue to say a very rich person, somebody who has a large, looks like probably Manhattan penthouse, big windows, fancy robe, fancy desk, but shadowed. So we'll have to see. Who is it? I don't get the appearance. I don't get the impression that it's the same mystery figure who is the Green Goblin. The body type doesn't quite seem the same, and we haven't seen the Green Goblin in this area. We've seen that mystery person in more of a lab, stuff like that. But who knows? We'll have to keep reading and find out. I will say I've talked about this before. The colors. This person's in green, so there's a pretty good chance that they're a villain. When you see characters that wear green and purple, tends to be a villain, your secondary colors. So we will have to find out. And there we go. There is the comic. So we're back here, and that was Amazing Spider-Man number 19. A very interesting issue. Like I said, tons of action. If you really like superhero Spider-Man fighting, showing off his range of abilities and powers, this is a great issue for you. You'll love it. And now we've gotten through this 3-issue story arc, and then that opens us up for the story can go anywhere. Do we introduce a new character? Do we dive into the mystery of the Green Goblin? Do we dive into this mystery of who is having Peter followed by a private investigator? Do we get into more Aunt May's health? Do we deal with the issues of Peter Parker and Betty Brant versus Liz Allen, who's also shown a lot of interest in Peter? There's a lot of ways we can go with the story, and that's the beauty of something like this, where you have that 3-issue arc, you wrap it up, and now you have a complete new direction to move in. So really neat idea, very cool storytelling, and a fun issue. Super cool. We've seen a lot of firsts, and it's great to kind of note that through history and continue to see where we go from here. So thank you all for being on this journey with me as we explore the Amazing Spider-Man. Again, if you have the opportunity, if you like these videos, please consider subscribing to the channel and make sure you click on the notifications, as these episodes do come out every Monday. So you want to get notified when the episode does hit in your time zone. And then also, like I said, just last week, I had a one-on-one live conversation with Nick Caputo. My goal is to do more of that. I'm looking to try to get some other guests who can come on and talk about these issues, and I'm very much looking forward to getting that done as well. Plus, of course, when you subscribe, you get my other content as well. Sometimes I do art videos where we'll talk about art techniques, tools, etc. I just did one recently on some of the do's and don'ts of character design. So again, if you're a young artist or a new artist and you're looking to create your own superhero characters, I've given you some pointers on things that work and things that don't work when it comes to creating characters. So check them all out, enjoy, and we'll be back here next week with another Art of Spider-Man retrospective video. Thanks so much for joining me.